This is the Political Dispatch.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not.
Why are you so keen that I should involve myself in the internal affairs of Cuba and Libya? I expect you to be consistent. I don't know if I have paralyzed you.
No. Aren't Arabs terrified? Aren't Iraqis terrified? Don't Arab and Iraqi women weep when their children die? Doesn't bombing strengthen their determination?
I just got health insurance for the first time a month ago. This is not an elitist issue. This is a quality of life issue.
You cannot continue to victimize somebody else just because you yourself were a victim of it. There has to be a limit.
The golden age of America begins right now.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Political Dispatch, the podcast where we explore the world's headlines and trace their roots through the past to make sense of the present. I'm Tom Spare.
I'm Lily Mott.
And I'm Sid Kurapati.
In today's episode, we're focusing on reforms being proposed by the UK government for special educational needs and disabilities, SEND, in schools across England.
You'll hear from fellow Be the Change Media Network members Eden Byrne and Troy Njinjimbenga about their connections to and lived experience of SEND.
First, though, you'll hear an interview between Tom and Caitlin Webb, a journalist who works for the Local Government Chronicle, who sets out the reforms being proposed by the UK government and their likely impact on the recipients of SEND.
SEND's been in the news quite a lot recently. Could you tell us what it stands for and what it is?
SEND is Special Educational Needs and Disabilities. There's some other acronyms that I will explain because I'm sure I will slip up and not and not explain them. There's a thing called an Education, Health and Care Plan, which is a legal document that if a child has SEND, so they have extra needs that they need to be met in the classroom, or health needs, or the other one is social care, says health, because I think that's one element that's also missed, like if they need support at home, or if they need, adjustments made to their houses and things like that, or if they need like a route to school. There's a home to school transport is another slogan that people use, and that's the local authority funded travel to school, and it isn't always a bus. It's sometimes like a taxi if they have complex needs, or they can't take a bus. It could even be because they're the only one in their area who needs homeschool transport. It doesn't have to be that they have a physical disability so they can't take a bus. Sometimes it's a personal allowance, so the parents would get a certain amount to cover that. All of the SEND measures that is currently in I think it's England or Wales. I'm going to admit I only really know what's happening in England, so apologies for all the other devolved countries who listen to this. I know mainly about what happens in England. All of these measures, like the EHCP that I've mentioned, SEND and the homeschool transfer, all of that, it comes from one Act of Parliament, which is the Children and Families Act that came in 2014, I think. So it must be, it's over 10 years ago. So that's where this all began, because before that they had a thing called statements. They also, there wasn't that like division between education, health and care. It was a statement of this is all of the needs the young person has. The initial idea behind the system we have was that they wanted to make sure that there was more involvement of parents and families, and because they found that there was a lot of a teacher had to refer, or it was only really like parents who were like really aware of it, or if there was a very visible, very well-known disability, or like it was really understood what the needs of that child was. So they tried to create the system where there's more involvement from parents and families, there's more involvement of the education and the health and care. So it's trying to kind of come up with a multidisciplinary approach to help. That was the dream, that was the idea, but it has become quite hostile. It has become the schools not being able to, this mainstream schools, so like the school you have in your town, they would struggle or find it hard to support children that had additional needs, particularly if they had behavioral problems or if they had learning challenges, or if they had neurodiversity, because when the classrooms are getting so much bigger and you're having a lot more children in your class, you're having less teachers, because all budgets on all education, health and care have been squeezed. So it's harder for a parent or for a young person to access those kind of measures that they would need within their school. So it created this system where if the parent or family thought that their child was not getting the care the needs met, they would escalate it, and they'd get an EHCP. There's loads of obviously support groups for families and parents I don't think that there is any blame should be at the parent for wanting to use whatever facilities and access that they can to improve their child's life. I'm never going to say to a parent that they shouldn't do that. And I'm saying that from the off because I know there is a lot of rife, I guess is a word I could use for that, was a lot of challenges where they think that parents are being pushy. I do say on the other hand though that it has created a hierarchy for parents. Like parents who have the time, the space, the knowledge, usually the money, because while it is supposed to all be free, if a child needs a diagnosis and the NHS, the waiting list is so long, there's people who go through private providers to get a diagnosis. You don't necessarily need a diagnosis to get a EHCP, but it does help. You have here's a condition, you have a lot more structure to it. It kind of created a hierarchy where those families that could afford both financially, time-wise, or just had the knowledge to be able to do it, could push for these extra support, could push for a place in a special school, could push for having a taxi ride or having a mini bus to school. There has been a lot of studies come up with research explaining just how much of a class divide it has created. If you aren't aware of your rights and what you can do, it's a lot harder to fight for your child. But also on top of that, if they're in an area where the school doesn't have as much resources to be able to explain to that parent as well. The idea behind it was to allow those who needed help, needed extra support at school, extra support health-wise, have a legal document that outlines all of the stuff they need. But to get that, funding wasn't met. There's a huge shortage of child psychologists who can diagnose or actually discuss with the family what the child needs. There's also speech and language therapists there's a huge shortage of. So if they do have learning disabilities in that way, this is the responsibility of local authorities. Local authorities or councils are essentially the hub of it. So they're the ones that have the legal responsibility to provide or source the child psychiatrist, the language speech therapist. They're the ones that are there to negotiate how EHCPs are created. But a lot of the time, it's sometimes the school that's gone, hey, we can't cover your child's needs. You need to go for EHCP. Or they go to the GP, the GP's gone, or you may need extra help because of health concerns, or it can be a social worker that's going, actually your child isn't, has behavioral issues. It may just be they need extra support in school, or they need to be in a different environment. So all of these access points but then the responsibility of local authorities, which has meant at the same time when local authorities are having their budget squeezed, and there is the pressure has more than doubled, that has meant that parents are waiting longer, families are waiting longer. If they are getting people are applying from the age of when their child is 3 years old to try and not cut the queue, but to try and fast track to So when they get to primary school, secondary school, they will have, you know, it there in time. So yeah, essentially, it's the dream of the provision for SEND is I believe it's a good idea. Everyone's on the same page that they want children that have that need extra support to have that support and to be able to thrive and have the best life possible. But this dream and this ideal everyone has not had their needs met. And I say everyone because even if you have had your needs met, it's a fight. Sometimes it's a fight. There's like the cases that have gone to tribunal because the local authority have said they can't go to a special school and they want to go to a special school, or they've sent them to a school that's like, you know, allocated a school that's further away. Yeah, so basically it's a mess. Everyone knows it's a mess though. Like everyone's on the same page, and it's nice as well. The government as well has been very clear that they know it's in crisis. They know it's a mess. I've been covering this for more than 10 years, and for it to actually have made it to the national papers and things like that it's sad that it's got to this stage, but it's also, I think that this is the time where, you know, the change is really going to happen, and you hope that some of the errors that have been made are going to be corrected, but there is a lot of worries about what they're proposing.
So you mentioned there about the reforms. Could you give a sort of overview of what's been set out by the UK government in terms of changes to SEND?
Yeah, so they came out with a white paper early this year. They have been promising this since they got into government, but it has been such a team effort. They've used quite a lot of political capital to do this. The fears initially, I'm going to talk about the fears and see if they're actually they were addressed. So the fears for parents is that AHCPs are going to disappear, because that is their one tool that they can go and fight for the needs of their children to be met. Those aren't disappearing, but they are changing. So EHCPs and I don't actually know off the top of my head from when these new reforms come in, because obviously it would depend on Parliament and how, you know, when it gets passed and all the process that way. But when it comes in, EHCPs will only be prescribed for those with the most complex needs. So that's where they have elements of education, health, and social care, all like, you know, they're on the top end of the needs being met. Or they say the most complex needs. So the idea or the hope of these reforms is they're going to fix as I said, one of the main issues is that the schools were not prepared for these, which is essentially what has in some ways pushed families to apply for these EHCPs in the first place. They've gone to school, the child, if they have a neurodiversity and they felt overstimulated, or if they're not having, like, even if they have dyslexia, dyspraxia, and they haven't been able to have any of the resources or tools in that way, or if they've not been able to get a teaching assistant, they've not been able to. So there's a lot of shortcomings that happened for a parent to then go, I need the extra support. So they want to try and prevent that from happening. So I think all schools are going to have the opportunity to create a hub, so they can create an extra building or an extra area of their school for sensory play zones for times out, or so there is a space where these children can go. There's also ideas that they're going to improve the training of teachers. How that's going to happen, there's also a lot of concerns, because it's like, are they going to retroactively train teachers? Do teachers retroactively actually learn stuff like this, or will there still be some inherent biases? And also, are you going to get more teachers? Because that's one of the huge issues with being able to get the support they need. So there is that part. And they've also said, like, new teachers will get, this extra training, which I can understand that's probably the easiest way to get the training involved. But it is, so instead of educational health plans, they're going to have these, they're called individual support plans. They are not the same in the fact that they don't they're not. This is a bit that people are a bit worried of. You don't know if they're legal. You don't know the parameters of it. Obviously, this will depend on like the legislation going through and how they define it. But a lot of these are essentially, it will be up to the school to provide the support plans and the support. It's less of a adversarial, I'm going to have to go through a legal route, so trying to get through a tribunal to be able to, to get the support they need. It's not a one piece of paper that doesn't change. It's kind of, they're hoping it'll be more adaptable. Like it won't be, you go to this school and, once that EHCP is saying you'll go to that school, that's the school they go to. They're hoping it will be also a bit more interactive. So they're coming up with like having young people have like an access code to it. So every young person has a kind of, I guess it's kind of like for us, for adults, where you have your job seekers thing where everyone has like a code or a number. So it means like all of the multidisciplinary teams can all access the information. The idea is it will stop or it will curb this increase in EHCPs, these legal documents, and improve mainstream education. But a lot of it, there's a lot of worries about whether schools can do it, whether they actually have the ability to do it or the capacity to do it, whether they want to do it. I think that's been the main thing. People are frustrated with health not getting as involved and having as much of the accountability, and it's all being on the councils and it's all being on the schools. So there is other elements to it, but that's the broad overview. They're trying to correct the errors that the Children and Families Act 2014 created.
The government says, I think it's like 1 in 3 children will have some educational need at some point during their schooling. So, as you say, the focus of the reforms are to focus on the children with the most severe or complicated needs. Do you think there's the capacity within the councils and schools to deliver what's been promised?
I think it's going to be a challenge because obviously the financial element to it. I don't think it's going to be a challenge because people don't want to. Currently, the system as it is expensive because there are private profiteering special schools. The price of their placements is extortionate. Essentially, there's the financial element because councils have been stripped for funding. Education's really struggled with funding, but as it stands, special schools and having special place at home to school transport is also a huge financial pressure.
Yeah. Taxi is the big thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So having children go to their local school, not having to travel such long distances, that could also help with the financial pressure.
So you've mentioned that the families often find the sort of current system as a real struggle, a fight to get just the basic needs, not even like the more complicated covered. Do you think these proposals help change that fight for getting the basic needs covered, or is it sort of opening up a different set of problems in a sense?
The intention is to stop the fight. It is a lot more reliant on the education side with this because it is up to the schools to create these individual support plans. It is up to the schools to provide the send hubs that they've come up with. So it really depends on whether there's going to be, I don't want to necessarily quote a politician for said that, but if there is a money tree that they do find and they can obviously put more funding into education, but then teachers, they do so much and there is only so much in their day. So you need more teachers, you need better funding. So I want it to work. Of course I do, because I've seen it for at least 10 years about how bad it has been. But yeah, I don't want to say it doesn't because I don't want to tempt fate, but I also know there are some huge concerns about it.
The schools that are doing it well and have the resource, probably more likely to be middle class areas anyway, and to have governors, parent governors on there whose kids are impacted by it, so it's run in a particular way. they're probably going to pick this up and run with it and do very well, and their Ofsted scores are going to be great. It's fundamentally, isn't it? It's the areas, as you were mentioning at the start, who are impacted by this, who already have the bad Ofsted scores or borderline, and also areas that are, high levels of of deprivation and that sort of thing. The schools that need it most are probably the ones that are going to struggle to deliver the reform. Is that a fair assessment, would you say?
I wish it wasn't, but yes, that
Okay.
is probably mainly because also it depends how you measure deprivation. I think there's one element people don't discuss enough is about rurality as well. So if they're in a rural area and the catchment area is bigger, or the schools are smaller, it does become a bit of a postcode lottery of how these needs can be met. When Children and Families Act was created, they were talking about these personal allowances. So and I think families can opt for a personal allowance, which means, for example, if you need to go to work earlier and you need to pay for a childminder, or if you need to pay for, so you can use it in that way, but that's not used as much. I think people quite like having taxis or having a guaranteed, organized thing, and taxis do have contracts, so they won't be charging the same rates we do when we get a taxi. They will be on a cheaper way for that, because they'd be doing it obviously they'll know that they have to do it every day, so they can
set work.
But yeah, is an interesting dynamic, because it's not an easy fix, and it's probably why it's got to such a bad place, because there isn't one lever you can push. There's so many.
Keir Starmer was quoted saying, in a committee, he was like, I pull one lever and I think I've sorted something, and then but then I realise it opens a door for something else and I don't understand it. I think that's probably part of the problem with governing the UK, is the complexity is there because things have been left for so long. If you maintain something, it's the same if you were to maintain a house and you constantly checking the guttering and the roofing and making sure the insulation works. That's fine. But if you leave it for years and years and years and it falls into disrepair, it's going to be more expensive to maintain and then ultimately to fix as well. And that's a very basic analogy, but oversimplifying it. But it is the case that a lot of these things, as you say, have been left for too long, and it opens up other complexity. So it was difficult.
I also feel because you say too long, the Children and Families Act was only 12 years old. That's not long in the scheme of legislation. But I think it's more because it might be, I don't know, I'm going back to our political science days, where maybe it's because we don't have a codified constitution, and every time you need to make a new rule, you have to deal one bit of legislation that doesn't connect to all the other, offices in Whitehall. Yeah, it is very, it can be quite peaceful, which does mean that it can be also quite agile, because it means that if there's just one element that needs fixing, you only have to do that one element. This is complicated. This involves so many different elements. To be able to, curb the private profiteering, you're going to have to come up with another legislation to, I don't know, make sure taxi companies can't charge X amount. Or do you give that power to the local authority? Do you give that to the mayor? That's another thing they're talking about. I don't think parents care about that. Parents don't have the time or energy.
Yeah, exactly. And particularly those that, are on the lower end of the income scale and are very time poor. As you say, to be able to keep up to date with your child's needs means filling out a lot of paperwork, having a lot of time, having a good sort of overview of a very complex system. And if you're time poor and are in poverty, you haven't got much luck, have you, really, in terms of actually getting the support that you yourself as a parent need, not let alone giving your child the support. And I think that's part of it as well. I was doing an episode for Be the Change podcast, and we were talking about World Autism Day. One of our members, Thomas, was talking about his experience of being autistic, and what support can we give to people with autism. It's as much about how our society is designed and has evolved. The fact that we do need a sort of wider look at structurally, as you say, not just our constitution, but how we interact with one another and what interest we take in everyone's lives. And at the moment, it's a society that's quite hostile to someone that is different. And whether that's having a disability or whether that means you're a refugee or, race or anything like that, it's not very kindly to people that don't meet a very average sort of stat, basically, of the path of least resistance. And if you don't meet that specific criteria, then you're like, oh, okay, this is complicated all of a sudden. So yeah, I think it sort of probably speaks more to that as well, as that how is our society designed as much as how is this education issue linked to a health outcome or something like that.
Yeah, one thing I will say though is, while I think you're completely correct, like there is a lot as a society we can do to help people who have differences, and I know we're saying that as two woke people, we're saying that I'm able-bodied, and so I know that I'm saying this from a huge place of privilege, but I also think it has improved. I think that there is progress, and I think the fact that, so when it comes to SEND, for example, people always point out, why is it doubled? EHCP's doubled, the legal document. Why, that just means that everyone's being diagnosed with X nowadays, or Y. Everyone's got a bit of, autism or ADHD or whatever. Everyone's got a bit of that. And it's actually the awareness you have. So I know I've shared with you before, I actually have been diagnosed with ADHD. It's a condition I've obviously had my entire life, but I was only aware of it due to the pandemic and the lockdown, and I realized just how badly it affected me. And I then obviously I've got diagnosed, and I just think, gosh, if I'd known about this in the 90s or early 2000s, if I knew that this was a thing, and also the guilt that came from my parents realizing that it's a thing, and them not realizing, they could have all this support I could have had. They knew that I didn't, I couldn't get into or didn't get into a grammar school. They knew that there was the stuff that I used to always get these reports saying you're not meeting your full potential and all that. It's very typical. I'm not saying that as a chip on my shoulder. It's very typical for people who have ADHD, particularly women. So I think that there is this idea that why is SEND such a huge thing right now? Oh, everyone's talking about it. And I'm like, I'm great, go for it. The more we talk about how people have different needs and have different support systems that need to be in place, the better. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it's annoying. It's hard because you can't just do one blanket thing for everyone. But the more we talk about it, the more we understand the complexities and the differences we have, I think I've always had this ethos that if it's not working for everyone, it's not working. And I know is easy for me to say as an observer on the outside. I know that in some ways it really does work. And I know there are some children and some young people that do thrive. But if everyone's not thriving, it's not working. There's issues, there's problems.
Well, yeah. And also added to your point, the Equality Act is only 16 years old. Before then, there were all these bits of legislation everywhere and people falling through the gap. So actually, it's sort of, as you say, we're only catching up with the reality. It's not, this is a falsification of the numbers and people are, using the system. It is very much a case of we're playing catch up and we're having to do it very, very quickly. And as you say, full credit to the schools and local authorities that are able to actually, with all of that baggage, able to actually deliver for kids as well. I didn't know if you had any final thoughts at all based on the conversation.
Yeah, I really appreciate the more people who are talking about this, and I was going to say this in a quip way, but the less I seem like a weirdo nerd that's rifling through papers and actually people are understanding just how much of a big issue this is, that I think the better. But also it's also quite sad because I was talking to, so there's this Association of Directors of Children's Services, which are people that work in local authorities. It's their job to do it's more the social care, but also SEND provision. I was speaking to someone from there and going, oh, it's popular now. People are talking about it. And he goes, yeah, that's great. It's exciting that people are more aware and like there's more, education and awareness about it. But at the same time, that means something's really gone wrong. That means like this is a challenge. The less people know about stuff, the more it's going okay. So there are spaces like this to discuss it, and we can keep the government to account to make sure that their white paper that they've spent months trying to plan and they've used, like I said, they've used their political capital on and make sure they actually provide what they're promising, make sure the schools actually do what they say they're going to do. And if they don't, they have a reason, and they have they can get funding, or there's things that they can do. Because a lot of the pressure and the responsibility has been on local authorities. And whilst I think that is right, I think that, those who have democratic leaders and they are able to kind of be a representative of their communities is great. But when there are so many different elements and so many different multidisciplinary teams working on this, I think the onus has to be on everyone, that everyone wants to do their best because they know that every child should have the best possible. I feel like I'm saying the government's rhetoric. They've got their program called the Best Start of Life, but there is a reason why everyone wants that to happen. But yeah, we've just got to watch this space. We've got to see how the legislation is formed, whether there's going to be pushback on certain stuff, whether when it does happen, the schools they're held to account either through Ofsted or through funding, and they're being able to, make the changes necessary. And as someone who wants to have kids someday, I really, for my own sake as well, and for my family's sake, that they fix it, because I'm sure, obviously with my genes, they might have some neurodiversity and needs. So I'm a bit biased, but I think it's for the better of everyone. And we've got to keep on the case. But I don't want to put that pressure on parents, because they've got, particularly if they do have children with SEND, they've got enough on their plate. And I hope that they can be a bit more relieved that something's happening now.
So we've heard from Caitlin, giving a really comprehensive overview of SEND, the reforms, what the implications might be, and some of the challenges. The next two voices you'll hear are from the Be the Change Media Network. First, you'll hear from Troy, who's been a recipient of SEND, based in England. And then you'll hear from Eden, who, although isn't based in England where these changes are being implemented, she is able to provide context of what it's like to be a carer of someone with SEND. Here's Troy and Eden.
I'm Troy Jujubanga, the Forgotten Generation podcast host and founder of the Stand Up and Out Collective. I was first aware of SEND when I was little at primary school, as I have a learning disability, and I was diagnosed for autism late 14 years old when I was at high school, when I asked my mum, why am I so different? And from there, I knew more about SEND from my special needs college, when I got to be part of a work experience in my local council and support in respite services for young people with disabilities. I think with my disability, and with me being autistic and learning disability, it's helped me be who I am, and I don't let my disability define who I am. And it shaped my life in a positive way, because I would sometimes think to myself, why am I so different? Why don't I have much friends? Why can I not do things like every other young person can do, maybe get a job and live by themselves and stuff like that. And I always thought, why can I not? And I realised that my disability is my superpower. And it shaped me because I get to advocate for those young people who have disabilities like myself, who want to have a voice but don't know how to, and to create to create a platform like the Forgotten Generation podcast and the Stand Up and Out Collective, to have a say and to get those voices heard, but also build a community so that they don't feel alone. But also it has shaped me in and talking to the decision makers about what it is that autistic people need and what we need in our everyday life for preparing for adulthood, but also the education system and what to make it better for the education system for young people, to make it inclusive and accessible for our needs. And yeah, I think it shapes me for who I am, and being autistic and having a learning disability. As yes, I'm different, but but we are the same at the end of the day, and I process things differently, and yeah, I kind of learn things differently, and that was okay. But I'm still me, and I'm proud to be who I am. The reforms for me would have been so much better at high school because I was part of because like a communication resource for people with disabilities to have extra support and help and support in lessons in mainstream. But I would have found the reforms more and beneficial at that period of time when I was at high school because I found it very hard to do a mainstream lesson without that support because it would have been a struggle for me, but also to process the information that the teacher was saying, but also learning was a difficult thing for me. And sometimes I didn't know how to approach my maybe maths teacher or my English teacher for support. It was a very hard thing because they had so many other young people in the classroom. It was hard to actually I get them to help me. So it was good to have a support in school. But I do think it would have been so good to have reforms then and then to have better education, health and care plans to make it more and better for the teachers who have SEN young people in their classrooms to be more supportive on how they approach that young person and their needs. But I think better and better ways of supporting young people who might find it hard to learn to have extra and resources and provisions. So I think it would have been so much better back then because we would have got that more support. And I think maybe I could have done well, maybe at my GCSEs. Who knows if I would have had that support? But but then again, I think the schools need to be more understanding that young people who have disabilities might not be able to achieve like other young people. So I think it's about making sure that they have a better a better understanding of everyone's needs and knowing how best to support them.
Hi, my name's Eden. I'm 22 from Belfast, Northern Ireland. My podcast is Sports for All, which is on Be the Change Media Network, and it's all about sports and encouraging young people to overcome barriers to get involved in sport. I'm also a first year childhood and youth studies student at university. I also care for my brother who has autism and learning disabilities. He is 19 and I've been caring for him since I was a child, but more so since becoming an adult. That can look like a lot of different things, but mostly making sure that he is okay emotionally, being here for him in terms of safety as he can't be left on his own, and also more practically helping him to get ready, get food, that kind of thing. I first became aware of SEND. It's actually different here. It's just SEND. We dropped the D here in Northern Ireland. I first became aware of it when I was maybe 5 or 6, and we were in the process of getting a diagnosis for my brother. So there was lots of professionals involved, such as speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, and social workers. I also have quite a bit of experience working with children with special educational needs. So I worked in a special school for a year as a substitute classroom assistant, supporting ages 8 to 19. So I saw what the support looks like in the classroom environment with different professionals, and also what health and social care plans might look like in practice, and communication passports and that kind of thing. I also worked one-to-one with adults with autism, 2 adults in a college environment, supporting them with their maths and literacy skills. So I saw the difference between a more tailored, specific educational support environment for those with special educational needs to a more mainstream setting that has more one-to-one support, and the differences in approaches to support and care within those, and also the similarities. I think the SEN reform will be so helpful for a lot of families, carers and children with additional needs. I think the statement of SEN can be quite rigid at times, and there's not necessarily a joined up approach a lot of the time between the healthcare system, social care system, and also the education system. So I think this will be a great thing to have a more flexible child/young person/adult centered plan put in place for that child or young person, and it'll be really great to see that implemented in all the different settings. I think it will also really help people get diagnosis early. We were lucky that my brother was really young, like 2, maybe 3, whenever he got diagnosed, but that's not always the case for a lot of young people with additional needs, especially those who are living in maybe different areas, deprived areas, who don't have the resources or support. Maybe whose families aren't really aware of additional needs, and also it's a lot harder to get early diagnosis for girls as well. So hopefully this will help them to get a quicker and earlier diagnosis, which will support them throughout their life. I think also funding is also a big challenge, and hopefully the reform can help get more funding into schools, into healthcare settings. There's also more distribution between the funding in mainstream and also special schools, because there's a lot of children that sometimes can fall through the gaps, especially if they're in a mainstream setting. So I think it'll be really good to see more support there for those children, and also hopefully more training for teachers and classroom assistants in the mainstream schools, as well as more access to specialised support potentially as well with the funding. Specialists can be very hard to come by, and I think in terms of like my brother's school, they're really well equipped with occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, physios. All the classroom assistants and teachers are really well trained and really aware of different needs. But this isn't always the case, and even in some special schools, there isn't the access to those resources or professionals. So I think that it will be great to have a more widespread and a more continuity of care across the different schools and regions. Overall, it will be just a really great way to see more, hopefully, positive changes happening. And although my brother is transitioning out of an education system, it will be great to see these changes being made and hopefully making such a positive difference to so many families and children's lives.
Our thanks to Caitlin, Troy and Eden for your contributions to this episode.
This has been a Be the Change Media Network production. My name is Lily Mott.
I'm Tom Spare.
And I'm Sid Kodapati. You've been listening to the Political Dispatch.